What if I told you two of music's biggest names, Usher and Ne-Yo, just popped up in P. Diddy's federal racketeering and sex trafficking trial? You heard that right. During testimony last week, a key witness casually dropped their names into the record, and suddenly every headline is asking why these A-listers would be in the room when one of the prosecution's star victims was allegedly beaten. But the real question isn't just who was there. It's what does it mean? Are we looking at bombshell corroboration of a pattern of violence? Or is this just another dramatic twist in an already explosive case? Over the next few minutes, we'll break down exactly how and why Usher and Ne-Yo were name-dropped, what that does to the prosecution's narrative, and how the defense will use it to try to unravel the government's case. So buckle up, this isn't your average courtroom drama, and the fallout could change everything. Sean Diddy Combs, once a titan of hip-hop and mogul of Bad Boy Records, now stands in a Manhattan federal courtroom charged with leading a criminal enterprise that allegedly trafficked victims for sex by force, coercion, and intimidation. The indictment accuses him of racketeering under the federal RICO statute, which means prosecutors must prove he orchestrated a pattern of criminal acts, not just an isolated incident. Layered on top are the charges of sex trafficking by force and transportation for prostitution, serious felonies that, if convicted, carry decades behind bars. Diddy pleaded not guilty on day one. His defense argues that the government's case relies on sensationalist witnesses, shaky memories, and the hope jurors will fill in the blanks with gut-wrenching assumptions about titled celebrities abusing the vulnerable. But with detailed testimony from his one-time partner Cassie Ventura, who described multiple physical assaults over their decade-long relationship, the prosecution has already given jurors vivid glimpses at allegations of violence lurking behind the velvet ropes of fame. Through grainy hotel videos, Cassie's own words, and the accounts of employees and friends, the government is painting a portrait of Diddy not as a philanthropist and artist, but as a predator who used his power to control women. Into that picture steps Don Rashard, a vocalist whose singing credits include Donny Kane and Diddy Dirty Money, projects under Combs' label. Her testimony extends Cassie's allegations, claiming first-hand observation of multiple beatings at Diddy's Los Angeles home and a West Hollywood restaurant. Every time she recounts another punch or chokehold, she's reinforcing the idea that this wasn't a freak blow-up, but a repeated pattern. That pattern is crucial to the racketeering charge. Then came the bombshell. Under cross-examination, Rashard said Usher was at the dinner, Ne-Yo came through, and even famed producer Jimmy Iovine had been in the room. In one fell swoop, the trial shifted from allegations of physical harm to a spectacle of star-studded intrigue. These aren't just background names, they're potential corroborators, powerful figures whose presence in court papers lends undeniable weight to the narrative that these alleged beatings happened in the open, among Hollywood's elite. Yet the defense seized on the omission. Why didn't Rashard name these stars in her initial statements to prosecutors? Was she protecting them, or herself, from scrutiny? Now every syllable she utters is under a credibility microscope. And as the trial moves forward, the next question looms large. Did those celebrities actually witness the abuse, or is their mention nothing more than dramatic padding? To understand why Usher and Ne-Yo's names matter, we first need to know who Don Rashard is, and why her testimony carries weight. Rashard began her music career in the early 2000s, eventually signing with Bad Boy Records. She sang on Donny Kane's debut album in 2005, an album executive produced by Diddy that soared to #1. Later, she joined Diddy Dirty Money, a trio formed around 2009, releasing 2 singles before disbanding in 2011. In other words, Rashard wasn't a casual acquaintance, she was an insider, living and working under Combs' roof for years. When prosecutors called her to the stand, it wasn't to dissect studio sessions or promotional tours. They wanted her to testify about violence she claimed to have witnessed firsthand. Rashard detailed multiple incidents at Diddy's mansion, punches, slaps, chokeholds, culminating in a scene she described as a terrifying eggs and skillet attack, where Combs allegedly swung a pan full of eggs at Cassie's head. She said she'd seen these outbursts so often that rehearsals felt less like creative sessions and more like a front-row seat to domestic abuse. Under direct examination, Rashard described the room as filled with label staff and bodyguards: Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia Drock, Keena Harper, and her own group members. No mention of celebrities. That mattered to prosecutors, who wanted to establish a clear, unbroken chain of witnesses who could corroborate Cassie's claims. Each name she provided was someone who answered to Diddy, someone bound by loyalty or contract. Those details helped forge a narrative. These weren't rumors or hearsay. These were trained professionals running errands, managing bookings, people who had no reason to lie. But credibility can be a double-edged sword. On cross-examination, defense lawyers zeroed in on the difference between Rashard's earlier statements and what she was saying now. They asked again who was at the notorious dinner. And after listing the same bad boy employees, they pressed, weren't there any celebrities? Rashard nodded, then delivered the moment every headline seized on. Usher was there. Jimmy Iovine was there. Ne-Yo came through. In that instant, the room shifted. The prosecution's clean chain of label employees expanded to include music royalty who needed no introduction. Critics immediately wondered, if these megastars truly witnessed the alleged assault, why didn't Rashard name them from the start? Pro-defense voices called it a gotcha moment, suggesting Rashard's memory was malleable or manipulated. Meanwhile, prosecution backers argued that depth of detail bolstered her veracity. She remembered more names once prompted, because her memory was precise and layered. Today, Rashard's reputation hangs in the balance. Was she simply overwhelmed in her first interviews, neglecting to recall famous faces? Or is this a last-minute embellishment to revive a stale testimony? As the trial unfolds, every prior statement, text message, and interview will be pored over. Because in a RICO case, witness credibility isn't just procedural, it could decide the verdict. Imagine you're at Diddy's Los Angeles mansion, the epicenter of Bad Boy's creative empire in 2009. You've just left the studio after a midnight session, and Cassie Ventura, then Combs' protege and romantic partner, has gone to the kitchen to whip up some eggs. The mood's calm, a quiet pre-dawn moment, just the hum of the stove and the soft chatter of friends winding down. Then, like a bolt from the blue, Combs storms in. Witnesses say he had a look of rage in his eyes. Don Rashard told the courtroom she watched in horror as Combs berated Cassie over something trivial. Her eggs weren't to his taste. According to her, he snatched the skillet, eggs splattering as he lifted it high, and brought it down toward Cassie's head. Hot yolk and shell scattered across the floor as Cassie crumpled, clutching her skull. Rashard described the blood drain from Cassie's face, the metallic tang in the air. She said she stepped forward, heart pounding, but Combs' bodyguards held her back. No one dared intervene. That wasn't an isolated outburst. Rashard recounted repeated episodes between 2009 and 2011, slammed doors, wild accusations, full-blown beatings, punches to the stomach, slaps across the face, chokes so tight bruises surface days later. She said rehearsals with their trio felt less like creative showcases and more like tense performances, where every lyric carried the fear of provoking Combs' next explosion. On direct, prosecutors painted a chilling sequence. The Skillet attack set the tone, proving Combs could turn everyday moments into violent spectacles. They argued this showed a pattern of behavior, critical to satisfying RICO's pattern of racketeering requirement. Each violent act became a racketeering activity if tied to Combs' alleged criminal enterprise, building a timeline from that first Skillet swing to the alleged sex trafficking operations. For the jury, this was the first visceral taste of the prosecution's narrative. They heard about Cassie's screams, the Skillet dent in the wall, the text messages Cassie sent friends afterward. Jurors watched crisp video of Cassie's hotel interviews, where she spoke of black eyes and shattered confidence. Rashard's role was to corroborate those accounts, to say, yes, I saw this too. But the defense pushed back hard. Under cross, they questioned the timing. Why come forward years later? They suggested Rashard had loyalties to nurture, careers to protect. And they noted discrepancies in her recollection of dates, locations, the sequence of events. Was the Skillet incident truly in 2009? Or could it have been 2010? They asked jurors to consider memory's fallibility. Still, the Skillet moment anchored the trial's early narrative. Behind every glamorous photo op, behind every platinum record, lay a potential flashpoint of violence. That day in the kitchen would echo through every subsequent testimony. And for Cassie, it became the most powerful symbol of alleged abuse, a skillet in hand. Not for cooking but for crushing. Picture a plush private dining room in West Hollywood circa 2010. Low lighting, a long mahogany table, white linen napkins folded beside engraved silverware. Around that table, some of Bad Boy's top executives, a handful of bodyguards, and according to Don Rashard's testimony, more than a few celebrities. Cassie sits beside Diddy. Rashard is a few seats down, tuning her vocal warm-ups between bites of salmon. The conversation drifts from new tracks to tour dates, until suddenly it doesn't. Rashard recounted that, mid-meal, what began as a hushed dispute erupted into violence. Combs allegedly lashed out at Cassie during a private exchange, landing a punch squarely in her stomach. She said the force was so severe Cassie gasped, doubled over, moisture pooling in her eyes. The room froze. Napkins hovered midair, forks paused inches from mouths. For a moment, no one moved. Under direct examination, Rashard described the scene in purely functional terms. Who was seated where? When Cassie rose to steady herself, how bodyguards reacted. She identified Harve-Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia Drock, Bonds, and a few others by name, all connected directly to Bad Boy. No Hollywood names were mentioned. Filled with anxious energy, the prosecution used this moment to underline that Diddy's alleged violence spilled out of private mansions and into public settings. It wasn't hidden behind closed doors, it unfolded at dinner tables and spotlighted venues. But on cross, the story took a twist that rippled through the trial's second week. The defense attorney leaned in and asked, "Ms. Rashard, you mentioned some Bad Boy staff, but weren't there celebrities at that dinner?" Rashard paused, glanced around the courtroom, then said yes. Usher was there. Jimmy Iovine was there. Ne-Yo came through. I don't recall the others. In that instant, the dining room in West Hollywood ceased to be a closed ecosystem of label insiders. It became a star-studded gathering, with megawatt performers in attendance. That revelation gave reporters the headline they craved: Usher, Ne-Yo named in Diddy trial. But in legal strategy, headlines mean less than consequences. For the prosecution, adding Usher and Ne-Yo created high-profile potential corroborators. If these stars indeed witnessed the assault, their statements, even if never made in court, could bolster the narrative that Combs's violence wasn't just whispered rumors but overt acts committed mid-performance, in front of peers. Yet the defense pounced. They argued that Rashard's memory only improved when big names were on the table, suggesting the witness tailored her testimony for drama. If you remember these celebrities back then, the attorney asked, why didn't you tell the government during your first interviews? That question attacked Rashard's credibility head-on and opened the door to injecting doubt about every recollection she ever gave. For jurors, the scene in West Hollywood became a microcosm of the trial's tug-of-war. Was this testimony the product of honest recall, or was it part of a broader effort to sensationalize the case against the music icon? And as the trial presses forward, the answer to that question will shape how jurors interpret every subsequent witness, every new claim of violence, every detail about flights, payments, and alleged trafficking. The courtroom held its breath when Don Rashard uttered the names Usher and Ne-Yo. It was a classic cross-examination pivot, from a dry roster of label staff to marquee artists whose careers eclipsed the room itself. But beyond the tabloid appeal, this moment struck at the heart of what jurors must decide. Whose memory do they trust? In cross, the defense methodically reminded Rashard she'd already testified about who was present, and no celebrities were named. Then came the pivotal question: you said earlier there were other individuals at the dinner. Do you recall suggesting some were celebrities? Rashard nodded. Please name them, defense counsel pressed. With a slight shake of her head and a measured voice, Rashard replied, Usher was there. Jimmy Iovine was there. Ne-Yo came through. Immediately, murmurs rippled through the gallery. The defense asked follow-ups. Did she speak directly with them? Did she see them witness the assault? Rashard clarified she didn't know if they saw the blow but remembered talking to them later. That nuance was critical. The prosecution had never claimed Usher or Ne-Yo personally watched Combs hit Cassie. The claim was only that they were in the vicinity. The defense seized on that distinction. If these stars didn't witness violence, why do they matter? The answer, from the prosecution's perspective, is twofold. First, if high-profile figures were present, it underscores that the alleged assault wasn't a private spat but a public display. It shows Combs's alleged willingness to use force in full view of friends and colleagues. Second, it hints at potential third-party witnesses whose observations the prosecution could call, or at least reference, to buttress their pattern of racketeering argument. But defense attorneys zeroed in on Rashard's omission. They argued her memory was so selective that she forgot names unless prompted. They questioned whether this was a strategic insertion designed to add sensationalism to her testimony. And in closing arguments months from now, they could highlight this inconsistency as proof that Rashard's entire account was untrustworthy. For jurors, these dueling narratives present a dilemma. Is Rashard a credible witness whose memory simply opened up under questioning? Or is she reconstructing events to fit the prosecution's storyline? The broader stakes make this more than a technical credibility battle. It speaks to the trial's core. The prosecution must prove a pattern of racketeering activity, which relies heavily on witness accounts demonstrating repeated acts of violence. If Rashard is credible, her testimony ties multiple incidents together. If she's not, the prosecution's pattern could collapse. The defense's strategy is clear: undermine her, and you weaken one of the trial's key threads. Shake her credibility early, and you create a ripple effect that calls into question Cassie's testimony, the hotel videos, and any other witness whose memory or motives might be suspect. In a case where every detail matters, name drop or no name drop, the battle for truth hinges on what jurors believe, and that, more than any explosion of celebrity gossip, might decide the verdict. In cases of alleged abuse behind closed doors, witness testimony is everything. Add celebrities to the mix, and you're playing on a different field. For the prosecution in the Diddy trial, every high-profile bystander becomes a potential linchpin. If Usher, Ne-Yo, or Jimmy Iovine truly witnessed an assault, their mere presence adds undeniable heft to the narrative that Combs's violence unfolded openly, and that it was witnessed by peers with nothing to gain by lying. From a legal standpoint, RICO charges hinge on proving a pattern of racketeering activity. Repeated acts of violence, witnessed, described consistently, and linked by multiple sources, help establish that pattern. Celebrity bystanders, even if never called to testify, can be referenced in closing arguments or as part of the broader story. Their names capture attention, but they also serve as a proxy for reliability. These aren't random bartenders or anonymous staffers. These are Grammy winners and industry titans known worldwide. But name drops can cut both ways. For defense attorneys, celebrity mentions are an invitation to attack witness credibility. They'll argue, if these stars were really there, why didn't you mention them earlier? If you remembered every detail about who was serving drinks and passing plates, how could you forget these famous faces? And if your memory faltered on that point, what else have you misremembered? From cross-examination to closing, the defense will hammer on that inconsistency, framing it as proof. There's also the question of motive and access. Celebrities move in tightly controlled circles with layers of management and PR. If Usher or Ne-Yo had knowledge of an alleged beating, their teams would have statements, texts, or retellings ready. To date, neither star has spoken publicly. Refusal to comment is standard legal advice, but jurors will interpret that silence however they choose, as prudence or as concealment. Prosecutors could argue that these stars declined to testify only because they were protecting Diddy's reputation, or their own. Defense could retort that silence indicates they never saw anything worth noting. Beyond courtroom theatrics, celebrity bystanders shape public perception. When social media erupted with Usher was there. Headlines, everyday viewers began to equate Diddy's alleged violence with a broader culture of complicity. That narrative can seep into jury deliberations, even subconsciously. Trial judges must shield jurors from outside influence. But in high-profile cases, it's nearly impossible to quarantine them completely. The mention of Usher and Ne-Yo turned a domestic violence case into a conversation about Hollywood's inner circles. And that conversation is now part of the record. In the end, celebrity bystanders matter because they blur the lines between private testimony and public spectacle. They threaten to transform a criminal trial into a celebrity soap opera. And while fame can lend weight to allegations, it can also open the door to attacks on motive, memory, and manipulation. As this trial progresses, every mention of an A-list name will carry more than tabloid cachet. It will carry the power to sway jurors, shape narratives, and ultimately tip the scales of justice. With roughly 7 weeks of courtroom marathon ahead, both sides are gearing up to introduce more players and more bombshells. The prosecution, having laid the groundwork on domestic violence through Cassie's and Rashard's accounts, now needs to pivot toward building its RICO and sex trafficking case in full. Expect to see former personal assistant David James take the stand, detailing wild parties, freak-off girls allegedly flown in for private sessions, and cryptic references to family rules that may point to systems of coercion. Next up, testimony on transportation. For sex trafficking charges, the government must prove victims were moved, or facilitated, in interstate commerce. That could mean frequent flyer logs, private jet manifests, or even receipts for chauffeured SUVs crossing state lines. If they can tie a payment for escort services in Miami to a flight to New York, that's a nail in the sex trafficking coffin. Watch for accountants, travel agents, or corporate executives, anyone who handled those transactions, to be called. Each ticket purchase, credit card statement, and expense report can help dismantle Combs's claim that he was simply an entertainer hosting lavish events. Then there's the potential surprise witness, Kid Cudi. Rumors swirl that he dated Cassie briefly and may have had peeks behind the curtain. If he takes the stand to confirm alleged incidents, particularly the supposed arson of Combs's car, which some witnesses have described as a retaliatory explosion, his testimony could add a new predicate act under RICO. But summoning a major star to testify is a gamble for both sides. Protracted media coverage, security concerns, and questions about motives. Does Cudi have a score to settle? Could muddy the waters. Meanwhile, Combs's defense will continue to chip away at each new witness's credibility. After the Usher Ne-Yo moment, they'll look for any inconsistency, a forgotten date, a shifted timeline, a name omitted from earlier statements, to drive a wedge between testimony and truth. Cross-examination will focus on text messages, social media posts, and internal communications that might undermine the prosecution's chronology. Expect defense experts in memory and trauma to testify about how stress and loyalty can warp recall. Publicly, both camps are ramping up messaging. Combs's attorneys will emphasize the presumption of innocence and claim the government is bruised by a series of failed RICO cases. Prosecutors will argue they've never lost a major sex trafficking trial and that the evidence, video clips, multiple eyewitnesses, financial trails, speaks for itself. Every pretrial motion, every judge's ruling on evidence, will set the stage for closing arguments that could make or break the case. What this all means for jurors is that they'll have to navigate a maze of sordid details, conflicting memories, and high-stakes strategies. By the time the last witness leaves the stand, they'll have heard about meals turned violent, private jets shuttling alleged victims, and name drops that read like a who's who of RB royalty. In the end, they must decide whether Sean Combs orchestrated a criminal enterprise, or whether the prosecution's story is built on sensationalism, shaky recollection, and selective storytelling. We began with a bombshell. Usher and Ne-Yo were allegedly at a West Hollywood dinner when Diddy punched Cassie Ventura. We've walked through the Skillet attack that set the trial's violent tone, the tense courtroom drama when celebrity bystanders were name-dropped, and the high-stakes legal strategies both sides will deploy in the weeks ahead. Now it's up to you to weigh in. Does the presence of megastars change how you view these allegations? Does it add credibility, proof that violence unfolded before respected peers? Or does it sound like a manufactured twist designed to grab headlines? As the trial moves into its next chapters, with ticket records, corporate ledgers, and possibly Kid Cudi's testimony on deck, remember that the core issues remain the same. Did Sean Combs run a criminal enterprise that exploited and trafficked women? Or is he the target of a sensationalist prosecution aiming to use his star status as clickbait? Here's what to watch for next: transportation evidence, plane tickets, flight manifests, and travel agents can tie alleged victims to interstate movement. Financial paper trails, accountant testimony and expense reports that could show how payments for illicit services were hidden within Combs's empire. Surprise celebrity witnesses. Will Kid Cudi or anyone else step into the spotlight? And if they do, what will their accounts add or subtract from the prosecution's pattern theory, expert testimony, defense memory experts versus prosecution crime pattern analysts, each shaping how jurors interpret every detail. As these pieces fall into place, keep one question in mind: is this a meticulously built case, or an edifice of sensational claims vulnerable to a single hole in its foundation? Because in a trial where memory is weaponized and every detail is contested, the difference between guilty and not guilty can come down to whose story rings truest. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think celebrity bystanders strengthen or weaken the prosecution's case? Which upcoming witness testimony are you most eager to see? And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We'll have recaps, expert breakdowns, and live commentary as this trial barrels toward its finale. Because in a fractured world of fame, the truth isn't just complicated, it's the story we can't afford to miss.